The lone gunman conclusion. The official case begins on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Investigators found 3 spent cartridge cases near a window overlooking the motorcade route. A rifle linked to Lee Harvey Oswald was discovered inside the building, and later firearms analysis connected that weapon to key ballistic evidence. Oswald had access to the 6th floor, left the building after the shooting, and was arrested later that day. The Warren Commission concluded that Oswald fired 3 shots. One probably missed, although it could not determine which shot. Another probably passed through Kennedy before striking Texas Governor John Connally. A later shot caused the fatal head wound. That middle shot became the most disputed part of the official reconstruction. Critics called it the magic bullet, arguing that one projectile could not have produced so many wounds. The commission's explanation depended on the actual seating positions inside the limousine. Connally sat lower, farther inward, and ahead of Kennedy, creating a path less impossible than simplified diagrams suggest. The House Select Committee later re-examined the physical evidence and still concluded that Oswald fired the shots that struck Kennedy from behind. Based mainly on disputed acoustic evidence, it also reported a high probability that another gunman fired and missed, although a later scientific review rejected that acoustic basis. The lone gunman conclusion has one permanent weakness. Oswald was murdered before a trial could test the case publicly through cross-examination. Even so, the evidence that he fired from the depository remains considerably stronger than any proven alternative shooter. The unresolved question is not whether suspicion exists. It is whether anyone has produced reliable evidence that another person helped him plan, encouraged him, or fired beside him. The Grassy Knoll theory. Within seconds of the shooting, witnesses ran toward the grassy slope beside Dealey Plaza. Some believed the sound came from behind the wooden fence. Others reported activity, smoke, or movement near the elevated area. The Zapruder film then captured Kennedy's head moving backward after the fatal impact, creating an image that appeared to many viewers like a shot from the front. That visual impression became one of the most powerful visual supports for the second gunman theory. Medical and trajectory reviews, however, concluded that the bullets that struck Kennedy entered from behind. No confirmed rifle, cartridge case, bullet, or identified shooter was recovered from the Grassy Knoll. Then, in 1978, the House Select Committee introduced what seemed like scientific confirmation. Experts analyzed a Dallas police radio recording made through an open microphone. They identified 4 apparent shot patterns and placed one near the Grassy Knoll. That analysis drove the committee's conclusion that 2 gunmen probably fired, and that a conspiracy likely existed. 4 years later, a National Research Council panel re-examined the recording and found that the supposed gunshot impulses occurred roughly 1 minute after the assassination. It concluded that the audio did not provide reliable evidence of a second shooter. The Grassy Knoll theory survives because the scene itself remains emotionally persuasive. Conflicting witness memories, people running uphill, and a film that appears to show violent motion toward the rear. But suspicion is not the same as physical confirmation. A second gunman remains possible in theory, yet the most celebrated scientific evidence for that gunman did not survive later review. The CIA involvement theory. The CIA theory begins with a documented relationship that had already become strained before Kennedy reached Dallas. The failed Bay of Pigs invasion damaged the administration and led Kennedy to accept the resignations of CIA Director Allen Dulles and Deputy Director for plans Richard Bissell. Kennedy's government also struggled over Cuba, covert warfare, and how aggressively the United States should confront Fidel Castro. Later investigations revealed a secret history the Warren Commission had not been fully told. The CIA had supported plots to kill Castro, including efforts involving organized crime figures. Those operations mattered because separate covert programs could connect intelligence officers, Cuban exiles, criminal intermediaries, weapons, and plans for political murder. When that history became public, an obvious question followed. Could part of that machinery have turned against Kennedy, The suspicion grew because the CIA did not provide the Warren Commission with complete information about the Castro plots. The House Committee later judged the original conspiracy investigation inadequate partly because the CIA and FBI had not fully cooperated. But documented withholding is not proof of assassination. The House Committee found that the CIA, as an institution, was not involved in Kennedy's murder. No official investigation has established that Oswald worked for the agency, received an assassination order from it, or belonged to a CIA team in Dealey Plaza. The theory remains powerful because the agency kept real covert operations secret and did not fully disclose the Castro plots to the Warren Commission. That history gives investigators a justified reason to distrust incomplete records. It does not complete the missing chain between institutional secrecy and the specific bullets fired in Dallas. The Mafia Retaliation Theory. The Mafia theory has something many assassination theories lack: a documented potential motive. Attorney General Robert Kennedy led an aggressive federal campaign against organized crime. Surveillance, prosecutions, deportation efforts, and congressional exposure placed sustained pressure on major organized crime figures. At the same time, some crime leaders had lost profitable casinos and influence after Castro took power in Cuba. Then came the most dangerous connection. The CIA had secretly worked with underworld figures in plots against Castro. Government agents and organized crime figures were not merely rumored to share an enemy. In limited covert operations, they actually collaborated. After Kennedy's murder, Jack Ruby killed Oswald inside a police basement. Ruby owned a Dallas nightclub and moved through a world containing gamblers, entertainers, police officers, and people with criminal associations. His sudden appearance beside Oswald inside the police basement made the Mafia theory feel almost complete. But the final operational chain never appeared. The House Committee found that the National Crime Syndicate, as a group, was not involved. It did not completely exclude the possibility that individual members acted independently. Investigators examined figures including Carlos Marcello and Santos Traficante. The committee found that both men had motive, means, and opportunity, but it did not establish that either participated in Kennedy's murder. The Mafia theory explains why certain people might have wanted Kennedy dead. It also shows why Ruby's act could look like the silencing of a suspect. What it does not establish is whether anyone recruited Oswald, whether orders were transmitted, whether payment was made, or why no reliable participant produced verifiable evidence afterward. A motive can make a theory plausible. It cannot make the missing operation real. The Anti-Castro Exile Theory. After the Bay of Pigs, many anti-Castro Cuban exiles believed Kennedy had betrayed the invasion force by withholding the level of U.S. support they expected. Some exile groups continued training, conducting raids, collecting intelligence, and working with U.S. intelligence personnel and other government contacts in covert programs. These networks included some participants with military experience, access to weapons, and intense political grievances. Oswald then crossed paths with anti-Castro activists in New Orleans. He publicly supported Castro and distributed material for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. He also clashed with anti-Castro activists, was arrested after the street disturbance, and appeared in a radio debate that made his pro-Castro identity more visible. To conspiracy researchers, those events look staged. One version of the theory argues that anti-Castro operatives manipulated Oswald into becoming a visible Castro supporter, then used him as a future scapegoat. Another proposes that a small breakaway group targeted Kennedy as revenge for the Bay of Pigs and U.S. restrictions on unauthorized exile raids. The theory gains strength from the confusing overlap between exiles, private militants, intelligence contacts, and propaganda operations. It is often difficult to determine where one organization ended and another relationship began. But the evidence has limits. The House Committee concluded that anti-Castro Cuban groups, as groups, were not involved in the assassination. It could not completely rule out the possibility that individual members participated, but it did not identify a proven exile team connected to the shooting. Oswald's encounters with anti-Castro activists are documented. The claim that those activists created his public identity or directed him toward Kennedy is not. The available evidence did not completely exclude unidentified individual participants. It did not establish an actual plot. The Cuban government retaliation theory. The Cuban retaliation theory reverses the direction of the secret war. The Kennedy administration supported sabotage, invasion planning, and economic pressure against Cuba, while the CIA pursued plots to assassinate Fidel Castro. From Havana's perspective, the Kennedy administration was not merely hostile. It was connected to repeated efforts to remove or kill Cuba's leader. Then Oswald emerged as an unusually convenient figure for the theory. He praised Castro, promoted the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, and traveled to Mexico City weeks before the assassination. There he visited the Cuban consulate and sought an in-transit visa that would allow him to travel through Cuba toward the Soviet Union. The theory argues that Cuban intelligence recruited him, encouraged him, or allowed him to act as retaliation for American operations against Castro. Its motive is easy to understand. Its evidence is much weaker. The Warren Commission found no credible evidence that Oswald received assassination instructions or large sums of money in Mexico. It found no evidence that the Cuban government helped him kill Kennedy. The House Committee later reached the same institutional conclusion. The Cuban government was not involved. Investigators examined claims that Oswald threatened Kennedy inside the Cuban consulate, attended suspicious meetings, or returned from Mexico with money. The House Committee rejected the consulate threat claim, while the meeting and money allegations were not substantiated as evidence of Cuban direction. A Cuban-directed assassination would also have created extraordinary risk. If discovered, it could have provoked military retaliation against Cuba and escalated the Cold War. Risk alone cannot prove non-involvement, but it weakens the retaliation hypothesis. But the historical record supports a narrower conclusion. Oswald genuinely wanted to reach Cuba and publicly identified with Castro's revolution. No official investigation has established that Havana converted that enthusiasm into an order to murder the president. The Soviet and KGB theory. Few facts look more suspicious in isolation than Lee Harvey Oswald's relationship with the Soviet Union. In 1959, he defected to the USSR and attempted to renounce his American citizenship. He lived in Minsk, married Marina Prusakova, and returned with her to the United States in 1962. During the Cold War, that biography alone guaranteed attention. Weeks before Kennedy's assassination, Oswald visited the Soviet embassy in Mexico City. In a later letter, he referred to meetings with Comrade Kostin, whom American intelligence identified as probably Valery Kostakov, a Soviet consular official and KGB officer associated in CIA reporting with Department 13, a unit described at the time as handling sabotage and executive action. For investigators in November 1963, that contact was explosive. The theory proposes that Soviet intelligence recruited Oswald during his years in Minsk, reactivated him through Mexico City, or used him as a deniable assassin against an American president. But the available record does not show Oswald being handled as a trained or controlled Soviet intelligence asset. Soviet officials initially resisted his request to remain, probably monitored him, assigned him factory work in Minsk, and later permitted him and his family to leave, although he received a government subsidy and unusually favorable housing. His public and erratic behavior also made him poorly suited to controlled clandestine work. Both the Warren Commission and the House Committee concluded that the Soviet government was not involved. Contact with a KGB officer was significant, but KGB officers stationed at embassies also performed ordinary consular duties, and Oswald approached the mission while seeking travel documents. The contact does not prove recruitment. The Soviet theory survives because Oswald's biography seems too politically charged to be accidental. Yet the available evidence shows proximity to Soviet intelligence, not command by it. The Mexico City and Oswald intelligence mystery. Mexico City is where several theories collide, and where documented intelligence errors, incomplete reporting, and source protection practices can resemble deliberate concealment. In late September 1963, Oswald visited the Cuban consulate and Soviet embassy while attempting to obtain travel documents. Both locations were monitored by the CIA through sensitive photographic and telephone surveillance operations. The records should have produced a simple answer. Instead, they created confusion. An early CIA cable linked reports of an Oswald contact with a photograph of a man who did not resemble him. An FBI memorandum suggested agents had heard a recording of someone identifying himself as Oswald, whose voice did not match him. Later investigation found that the photograph had been taken at the wrong time and showed an unrelated, unidentified man. The FBI also said it had not actually received an Oswald voice recording. Witness descriptions at the Cuban consulate added further contradictions. Some recollections did not match Oswald's appearance, while other evidence convinced the House committee that the man seeking the visa was Oswald, not an imposter. The deeper problem was institutional. CIA headquarters received information about some of Oswald's Soviet embassy contacts, but was not told before the assassination about every Cuban consulate visit or his transit visa request. As a result, information passed among the Mexico City station, headquarters, the FBI, and other agencies was incomplete and uneven. The House committee found the CIA's pre-assassination handling of Oswald deficient, but it did not confirm an impersonation plot. That distinction matters. Mexico City provides strong evidence of fragmented reporting, source protection limits, mistaken identification, and later confusion. It does not prove that a second Oswald was manufactured to frame the first. The mystery survives because intelligence systems recorded pieces of his journey without ever producing one clean, trustworthy picture. And that may be one reason the Mexico City mystery remains so durable. The records contain enough secrecy to justify questions, enough mistakes to damage confidence, and enough uncertainty to keep suspicion alive. But no official investigation has turned the disputed Mexico City evidence into a complete proven conspiracy.